Hi, me again, and this time I'm sort of going a bit more sort of philosophical with things, and looking at the idea of aesthetics, which is basically the expression of, amongst other things, sort of beauty and art, and such things as that, and it's obviously a very interesting area for a creator of any type, whether it be videos or music or, classical art, like pictures and such. But as I say, I'm probably going to be looking more from my expertise in music, because obviously I've been doing that longer than I've been doing this. So it's one of those things where I think, it can sort of impact really on how you perceive the art that you're doing. And that's kind of really what I'm kind of thinking of with this. The fact of, before I sort of learned how to make videos or learned how to play and sort of produce to a lesser degree music, it's one of those things where you just kind of take in, and you just perhaps sort of appreciate what it's there for, and just it's pretty, it looks pretty, it sounds pretty, it conveys a story in some cases, in again any of these forms, but then it was a case of, well, once you sort of learn how it all works, really, I suppose, through the application of the techniques picked up and such like, it does become a case, perhaps more, that it's not just, I suppose, art for art's sake. It kind of becomes more difficult, I think, to just sit there and say, well, this is just what it is. I know someone who has been doing a lot of the more production side, which I think perhaps really gives a key entry point into the analysis side, I guess. Would always be kind of thinking about how it sounds and how it all comes together, and being able to almost, I suppose, if you kind of, I don't know, see it like a cake, really, like a Victoria sponge, So you've got the what do you call them, like the top and the bottom, I guess, layers, and then you've got the jam and cream and whatever else in the middle. And most people, just kind of go nom nom cake and don't care about that. But if you were to make cakes for a living, perhaps, then you probably perceive the idea, perhaps, more of the different layers. So it's that kind of idea, and as I say, they sort of mentioned the idea to me, of when they were listening to things, and I was just kind of like, okay, well, can't necessarily get all of that, so. But then, after a time, it became more known for me to do that as well. Songs that I'd grown up with, I was hearing new things because, I've probably got more of a trained ear, in the same way that filmmakers can watch a film before they're a filmmaker, and once they've got a few of the techniques down, they will watch the same film and potentially sort of see it more as an interesting study, almost, in lighting techniques or framing or whatever else, depending on obviously their things, and I suppose actors will critique other actors a lot more than just going, this is a fun story. So it's quite interesting, and sort of the change in that is quite a gradual one, actually. It's one of those things that, unless you sit there and think about it, as I did before making this, really, it's not one of those things that you're necessarily going to sit there and actually think about, oh, I've changed my view. It's just one of those things that I've noticed organically has happened over time. And almost like the purpose behind it, can be changed. You can perhaps see it less of just an interesting bit of background, or anything like that. You can actually kind of potentially start to go, well, this music's for this purpose, that's for this purpose, and you can kind of classify a lot more, which is quite unusual. And that's not saying, you know, classify as in genre. I mean, classify as, I suppose, mood types, which, you know, a lot of, I suppose, modern music players try and do, based off BPM recognition, but it's not necessarily the case that works out as well as someone who knows not only perhaps the BPM just by listening, which is a trait that so far I have not mastered. I can get a vague idea. I know roughly, but you know, but it's that whole different thing of, you know, sort of not only knowing that, but kind of going, there's an oboe in that, so that makes me feel this way, compared to just going, oh, this is a bit of a sad song, or something like that. So it's a very interesting sort of path, really. And another sort of key point of it is really kind of, strangely enough, sorry, I had an itch. You know, strangely enough, sort of, it stops just becoming, oh, this new band's song is rather good. It becomes a case of, maybe they should have gone up 10 BPM. Maybe they should have incorporated a bit more of this sound in the guitars, or the other sound, and kind of, it kind of becomes that you're almost analysing as much as listening, potentially in certain circumstances, perhaps more. But definitely, you know, it is difficult to not have the element of analysis being quite strong. So it becomes quite unusual in that respect, and like I said before, you know, you can return to the same material that you've known for years, and all of a sudden it sounds very different, because you're able to isolate certain sounds and things like that, and I think it's like a lot of things. When you get better at a certain thing, you can revisit old things, either, you know, of your own or of someone else's, and your improved or increased knowledge base feeds back on that, and you can actually potentially go back in going, right, I need to redo this. And this is why sometimes you know, artists will do newer versions of songs more so than films. I think, you know, you'll have like 5 albums down the line, you know, there'll be a reworking of a track. That's because in those 5, you know, between those 5, that 5 album period, skills were being honed, new techniques were being picked up, even potentially new directions based on experiences, you know, can be picked up. I know that I've got songs that I've listened to recently again and gone, this needs tweaking, this needs tweaking, this needs tweaking. One of them, the entire song apart from the intro. But I was pretty happy with it when I first created the initial sort of demo mixdown. But I've learned in the year or so since then. So it's quite unusual in that regard. Now, of course, the biggest question perhaps is, you know, does it affect an appreciation? You know, and as I've said before, in a way, you know, it's very hard to just go, oh, that's a nice piece of music. Not necessarily in that bizarre voice, but it becomes a lot harder, I think, in some ways. But that said, because you develop a more critical mind, at least in my experience, I'm more open. And I have been really since I first picked up a guitar, let alone anything else. Becoming more open to other types outside of perhaps my normal preferences. At that point, you know, it's a case of, well, okay, that's a cheesy pop number, but from a technical standpoint, it's got this, it's got this, it's got this, it's got this, and it's got all these little things that, although the song itself is perhaps quite flippant and flowery and flighty and you know, some of the technical elements can be quite enticing, and you kind of go, that's actually not as bad as it first could be, and you know, you add perhaps a little more into your realm. By association, though, it is also quite possible. I can't think of a time when it's happened, but I don't see why it wouldn't be impossible, at least, for perhaps a song that perhaps you've known and loved throughout your life, and you listen to it and you kind of think, well, actually it's really quite empty. It's just guitar, bass, drums, vocals, that's it. And they're not even played technically well. You know, it doesn't have to have everything, you know, it doesn't have to be like Phil Spector's Wall of Sound kind of thing, you know, or anything like that. But if you know, you can go back to a song and go, this is too simple. It's kind of like, I suppose, going back to the food idea. If you start out with a Victoria Sponge, it's nice, and you know, it does the job. It goes, this I am cake, have me, eat me, be happy. But if you then move past that point and go, well, actually, I am now familiar with a number of cakes, and you try and eat a Victoria Sponge, it's not as satisfying. You know, you can't put your finger on it, but you just know it's not as satisfying. And it's a similar kind of idea. You know, the more complex kind of things come your way, the more perhaps things of a similar type can lose their appeal. But perhaps maybe, you know, it's, as much as anything, having an over saturation of things might also affect that. So that's a bit of a difficult one. So it is a very strange sort of thing, and as I say, from an aesthetic point, you know, I still appreciate the, you know, the sort of works that I put out and others put out in a number of fields that I have or am involved in. But by the same token, it's now, there's now that kind of contrast, I guess, you know, of the analyst kind of coming out. So there's the aesthete and the analyst, and one's going, oh, this is lovely, and the other one's going, yes, but technically. But I will still cry at a sad piece of music if it moves me so. I will still laugh and be overjoyed at a really good, funny film, or, you know, an uplifting film. And it doesn't mean that I can, you know, I've stopped appreciating them for what they are. If anything, perhaps, maybe I appreciate them more, because I can see more of how it's been created, and in that I'm not only getting, like, if you like, the facade of the appreciation, but I'm also getting the technical appreciation. So in fact, it's potentially increased my ability to enjoy these works. So yeah, double-edged sword in many ways, but I think a positive one. But really, you know, that's I think it from my point of view. But of course, as always, if you've got your own opinion, if you're a creator yourself of anything, and you either feel the same or you feel different, then there is a comment section for a reason. Let me know. Okay, pop your information down there, how you see it, and I will see you next time.